privilege of introducing our panel that we have this morning. We have a family drug court team members, and they range from a judge, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, guardian ad litem, and a case manager. They will discuss ways to incorporate tools in regular court practice and enhance services to young children and help successful permanency planning. On the far end is Judge Roger Heideman. He earned his BA in Benedictine College in Atkinson, Kansas in 1984, and then went on to complete his law degree at UNL in 1992. After serving as a partner for the law firm of Morris, Titus, and Heideman, Judge Heideman was appointed to the bench in 2006 by Governor Heideman. He is a former lead judge for Lancaster County's Through the Eyes of a Child team and currently serves in the Supreme Court Technology Committee and the Supreme Court Justice Automation Committee for the Juvenile Court. Alicia Henderson is the Chief Deputy of the Juvenile Division at Lancaster County Attorney's Office since January 2006. She currently serves on the Nebraska Supreme Court Commission on Children in the Courts, where she has served in court in Case Progression Standards Subcommittee and the Juvenile Delinquency Guidelines Subcommittee. She is a member at the LB 961 Advisory Committee and is the former team coordinator for Lancaster's Through the Eyes of a Child Initiative Task Force. She received her law degree from UNL so many years ago she doesn't even want to admit. And Jennie Cole-Mossman is a licensed mental health practitioner and service coordinator for Project Safe Start Nebraska. Project Safe Start provides mental health services to children ages 0 to 5 in family, treatment, drug courts along with their parents. Services include parent-child assessments and parent-child psychotherapy. Jennie is a licensed independent mental health therapist with training and experience in early childhood trauma, parent-child relationship assessments, and parent-child psychotherapy. Karin is an attorney with Thomas & Waldron in Lincoln. She has been practicing in Lancaster County since 1989 with a big emphasis in juvenile court and adoptions, and is a founding member of the Lancaster Family Drug Court team. She has a Bachelor's of Science from Kearney State College and her law degree from UNL. Born and raised in Holdridge, Karin is married to Brian Waldron and has 2 children and a granddaughter. And Nicole Lempke, she is a child and family services specialist and has worked in family drug court for 3 years. She is an undergraduate at UNK and a graduate from Illinois State University. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
I'm Jennie Cole-Mossman, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what a Safe Start assessment is, but I don't want to repeat. Can I see a show of hands? Did anyone go to the opening session with Joy this last year's week out? Okay, so I'll run through a little bit about what a parent-child relationship assessment or a Safe Start assessment is. The assessment is dyadic, so we always have a parent and a child together, and we use videotape to do observations of several tasks. We get a parent interview, so we get their history. We try to get developmental measures on the children, and then we videotape them and observe them doing a series of tasks. Some of it is free play, so that we can see how the parents interact. And then we also videotape them doing a series of tasks that become more difficult and more frustrating for the child. We watch the interactions between the parents and the child. We watch the child's reaction to the parent and the parent's ability to be attuned to the child's needs, soothe the child, and whether or not they are able to intervene and help the child on a developmentally appropriate way. And we also do, at the end of the assessment, a separation and reunion task to look at attachment. That's a very short description of the assessment. And then, if necessary, what we do is called child-parent psychotherapy, which is a dyadic psychotherapy between parent and child, where we work on things like attachment, strengthening the parent-child relationship, doing basic psychoeducation about development for parents, and we also work on trauma. So Project Safe Start, we started in the family drug courts providing this service to parents who had children under 5, because what we were finding is that while parents were becoming sober and working their way through drug court, they were often having difficulty with visitation with their children, or had a lot of trauma themselves, and the children had trauma, and those issues were not being addressed. So we started almost 2 years ago in Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy County. And the purpose of our panel today is to talk to you a little bit about each of the team members' roles in using these assessments, not only in drug court, but beyond drug court. Because these assessments, while sometimes difficult to find and be paid for outside of drug court, it can be done. We're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, because we think that might be helpful to you if you have specific questions about how to get these services in a rural area or how to get them paid for. We can talk about that. So I'm going to let maybe Judge Heideman start with his role and how he's used the Safe Start assessment.
Thanks, Jennie. As Jennie said, we started using this Safe Start assessment in our family drug court, and in the transition to privatization, we actually took a little hiatus in our family drug court. At that time, we only had one parent who was participating. So when we were going through this whole privatization process, we were trying to find kind of that carrot to get mothers into our family drug court, and we didn't know what we could offer. And fortunately, then we got this CAM grant funding to do the children affected by methamphetamine and do these parent-child assessments, which then gave us something at that time to offer to those mothers that we couldn't offer on a regular doc, because we didn't at that time have enough therapists who were trained to do the assessment, to do the therapy. So we had that ability to offer something to mothers that we couldn't offer on our regular docket. And since that time, I don't know how many therapists there are that are trained in Lancaster County now, but we now have, we're at that point where we can start offering it outside of the family drug court setting. So we can identify cases early that would benefit from this parent-child assessment and get a baseline of what parents may need to work on, and then set up those therapeutic processes so they can engage in that therapy. It wasn't without a little bit of a struggle. We have a fairly active defense bar in Lincoln, Lancaster County. When we were telling them what we could offer, the initial reaction was, well, you're going to get all this bad information about our clients that you're then going to use in termination proceedings. So how are we going to sell this to our clients that this is something that they should accept as being not only in the child's best interest, but in their best interest going forward, that it could offer something to get a child reunified with them, rather than telling them even more emphatically what their weaknesses are. So that's where we were at and how we got it started. So maybe Alicia then can talk about her role.
I hate it when people call me the prosecutor in juvenile court, because that's not what we're supposed to be. I've worn that hat for a long time, and I would prefer not to be the prosecutor. I prefer to be the petitioner, the person who brought the family to court to try to reunify the family and try to make the family well again. One of the things that I think the judge did bring up is that you end up with this document that does set forth, most of the time, and not all the time, but most of the time, a pretty significant deficit in relationship between the mom, and that's what we have in drug court most often, the mom and the children. And I'll let the parents' attorneys talk about that, but that's a devastating sort of piece of information to get about yourself if you're a parent. But you know, as a prosecutor, I'm trying not to go, hey, look, great, this is great evidence for termination later on. I mean, that's not what it's for. It was designed, and Jennie looked at me and said, Alicia, these are never to be used in adjudications or in terminations. And I have bought into that because that is not what it's for. It's a way to repair the relationship between the parent and the child. And if you didn't get to hear Dr. Joy Osofsky, some of the things that are on your thumb drive really are very helpful about why it is that the relationship is in need of repair and how this child therapy can actually be done to help the parent. And maybe Jennie will talk more about some of that process in case you don't know about it. But it really has opened my eyes to why I think we see, you know, we get a parent sober and then they go home and then it doesn't work and the parent relapses and we're just sort of going, oh my gosh, we just got you there. You know, we spent all these resources, your kids are so happy to be able to come home and then you go back and relapse. And why is that? And so many times it's because the relationship is so damaged that the parent doesn't know how to react to the child. The child doesn't know how to react to the parent. And they haven't worked on it enough to actually be able to make that placement work and be worthwhile. So I have found that it's very helpful in my own work also just to, you know, I don't know, maybe, should I talk about the drug court staffing we had the other day?
Sure.
Okay, so, you know, it just educates the people around you. So we're sitting there in the staffing, and actually the judge was on vacation, and we were doing family drug court, so we did our staffing without the clients, but we didn't tell the clients the judge wasn't going to be there that week. So we had all the parents come anyway, and they're like, where's the judge? And we said, well, he's not here, and but we're just going to do it anyway. So we had the mom come down, and she had her little baby, and what was she, 10 months? The child's about 10 months old, so not verbal, but, you know, sitting up and cute as can be, and we're all interacting. And the mom is doing really well from a sobriety's point of view. And, I mean, she's been sober for quite some time, and she's in the anxious stage, you know, I want to reunify, I want to get my kid back, you know, how come it's taking so long? And literally, her stress level is just going like this in the court hearing. And our little fake court hearing, I guess that's what it can't be court without the judge, excuse me, sorry, judge. In our little and the child, it's amazing to watch this baby literally and watch the child's interaction with the mom as the mom's getting more agitated. And pretty soon the mom starts crying, and the baby is still, I mean, it was just fascinating to me to see how much that child, I mean, I kind of know this, but how much that child was reacting to the mother's stress level. And it obviously gave something for you in the therapy, or with the therapist who's going to be there working with the child, to be able to say, you know, watch this interaction and help this mom realize how much what she's going through is coming out in the baby, and how much that she needs to work on that relationship. So, now, we didn't mention that to her that day, and that's a little rude, and not the right place to do it. But anyway, so I would say that from my point of view, I think it's been very helpful for us to be able to, and I want you to talk about how we get these darn things paid for in all of our cases, because it gives parents so much information and so much help about how to reconnect with their child. So, Jennie, get Medicaid or whatever it is.
Maybe Karin, if you want to go, and Karin's going to do two things. She's going to speak as a guardian ad litem and as a parent's defense attorney.
Well, from my perspective as a guardian ad litem, our goal in family drug court is to make healthy parents, to provide sober, healthy parents. And this is one of the best tools that we can do that with. But the parent has to buy into it and not be afraid of it. I think at the beginning, parents are very afraid, so you have to convince them that this is a good thing for them. And I can see spending more money on this kind of parenting therapy than to be spending so much money on supervision, supervised visits, travel expense, the transportation expenses. I think that we could probably succeed in permanency a lot quicker if we had this tool for our cases outside of drug court too. And that would be as a guardian ad litem and a defense attorney. I mean, as a defense attorney, you are a little concerned about people having too much information, like Alicia said. And, but then when you step back and you look at it, is my role as the defense attorney just to help them get through the motions here, get through, okay, I did this, I've done everything, what, you know, why am I not getting monitored visits, or why am I not getting overnight visits? And sometimes it's because they haven't applied it. And I think that this, therapy would be very beneficial in all the cases that in other cases that are in drug court too.
Well, I get to see how child parental therapy affects grown children and parents up close, directly one-on-one. And I actually have family drug court cases, obviously, that have child parental therapy, and I have regular drug cases because they're on Judge Heideman's docket. So I can usually get and those services will get paid for. And typically parents do not want to do this type of therapy. They need videotape, they have to answer so many questions, they don't like somebody standing over them when they're trying to be with their children, but I haven't had one parent at the end of their case or after they've started tell me anything negative about child parental. They've all had nothing but positive things to say about it. I had one particular case that I've been out with for 2+ years. Child parent psychotherapy got involved probably after 18 months to 2 years. There's 4 kids total. 3 kids were young enough to do the CPP. It was working. Mom was at overnights. She was at monitored visits. We were getting ready to place the children at home. Mom started to struggle, and the mom realized that she couldn't provide what her children needed before. She couldn't provide her children what they needed because of that bond that she built with them, because she had become attached to them and they became attached to her. She actually ended up relinquishing her parental rights so that her children could have a better life. And I fully believe that she wouldn't have came to that realization without the child parent psychotherapy. And in Lancaster County, at least, it works 1 hour a week per child. So this mom got 3 hours a week of child parent psychotherapy because each kid gets 1 hour one-on-one with mom, which is really nice because when you have 4 kids at one visit, no one kid is going to get anything specific. And so that's also a plus, and it's usually outside of normal visitation time. I also have another case on their regular docket that has child parent psychotherapy. This mom is the 4th child. The other 3 she's really pushed on, and she very much hates child parent psychotherapy right now. It's just started. She's very mad that the therapist is telling her how to parent. She's just wrong and how to interact with this 15-month-old. However, this child is traumatized every time she goes to a visit. She cries, she screams when she gets home from visits. She won't leave the bus from her parents' side. She wants to be held. And I really believe that nothing will fix that situation without this intense therapy. Regular supervision chemotherapy is good, and so the only way to move forward is to have this intense therapy. Otherwise, there's no way to move forward with this case. I've had nothing but positive experiences with child parent psychotherapy, minus the transportation issues that come up that I have to deal with. But it's really positive. I think it does much more than
stuff, and we put them together, and we wonder why visits aren't going well, we wonder why, parents are coming back into the system, but really the relationship is broken and there's trauma. And I don't think, if you've been to Dr. Asofsky's talks, or if you look at the flash drive, I don't think anybody in here would argue, even from their own personal experience, that the way we were parented and the things that happened in our life, even if some of them weren't traumatic, impact the way that we parent our children. So we're dealing in family drug court and in a lot of these child welfare cases with people who have never had appropriate parenting role models, who are not nurtured themselves, and who aren't, it's not that they're not able to do these things, but or not willing, but they aren't able either. They would really like to learn, and so that's what child parent therapy offers them. So, typically, in cases outside of family drug court, the assessment would be ordered. And once the assessment was done, I would then take the assessment, a treatment plan, and send it to their family doctor. All children have well-child checks through Medicaid. And the doctor is to look at all domains, even social emotional domains, developmental domains. And so I would contact their pediatrician after I got a release from the caseworker and send over information about child parent psychotherapy, about the child's trauma, maybe about some of the behaviors we're seeing. And what I would do is ask for a letter of medical necessity or a prescription. And I never had a doctor not respond to me and send this back to me because it's really been kind of outside of their domain. They're trying to treat these medical aspects and make sure these kids are on track developmentally. And so they were more than happy to write that for me. And then I submitted 50 pages to Magellan, including also child parent psychotherapy is an evidence-based treatment. And it has a very high rating with the California-based evidence-based clearinghouse rates relevance to child welfare, and so it has a high rating. And so I would send Magellan my assessment that I got paid for through the court order. I would send them the treatment plan. I would send them information about CPP, and then on top of it, I would send them this lovely letter from the doctor saying that this had to be assessed and treated. And I've never been denied services that way. It's a lot of work for therapists to do so, but it also is essential that they're communicating with this pediatrician because a lot of these kids have developmental delays. A lot of them are having somatic issues, stomach aches, headaches, sleep problems, eating problems, especially if we're dealing with infants. So it was good to be communicating anyway. So that is how I was getting them paid for when I was in private practice.
How many therapists across the state? Sorry, I'm asking.
No, go ahead.
Across the state are there that will do this, and where are they located?
Well, in Lincoln, we have about 8 therapists that we're training right now. In the Omaha area, in Douglas and Sarpy County, we probably have 15 therapists that we've trained. I'm going to leave my business cards up here because one of the great things about Project Safe Start is we've been fortunate enough to have Joy Osofsky consult with us monthly. So our therapists videotape, and they hate being videotaped as much as the parents do. Nobody likes to videotape. But it's really invaluable because we are able to, over a secure connection, show videotapes of assessments and sessions to Dr. Osofsky and receive consultation. We also do monthly consultations where there's a Douglas and Sarpy County consultation group and a Lancaster group. And it would be really easy for me to add in, if you have therapists in your areas that you think have a good background in child development, that have good clinical skills that are solid, it'd be really easy for us to add them into our training group.
Are you saying that there are no other therapists except for in Lancaster, Douglas and Sarpy?
To my knowledge, I don't know that have been specifically trained in child parent psychotherapy. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but to my knowledge, I'm not aware.
Is the training that they have to take as a licensed mental health therapist, practitioner, I should say,
we have posted, if you look under past trainings, Joy Osowski did a 2-day training several years ago for therapists on doing the assessments and doing the child-parent psychotherapy. And we posted that along with all of the measures that we use, the developmentally ordered tasks that we use. So when we get new therapists in, we have them train on that and then join the consultation groups before we give them a case. So it would not be difficult for us to add in therapists from other regions. It doesn't really cost us anything to have them go into these consultation groups. And we'd like to build the capacity. The issue that we have is that it's a lot of work to get it paid for. But the long-term benefits of healing that relationship up front and having good quality interaction and visitation, I think that's worth the cost. So.
Talking about judges getting us started, I'm in an area that doesn't have it. To get us started, is that a process? And you gotta get some buy-in, I imagine, right?
You probably have to get some buy-in, and we had a little, and I might let you all talk about this a little bit. We had to kind of, the idea of infant mental health was a harder concept to sell than we originally thought. So we kind of were under the assumption that people knew that babies had feelings and could be traumatized, and that we would just tell them about this wonderful assessment because we had such big training from Dr. Osowski. But it was kind of difficult. I might let Judge Heideman talk about his initial feelings when Vicki and I came to him and said, "We got this great idea."
And that's what Jennie did. She said, we've got this great idea. And it's kind of that, well, I'm not quite buying into it at this point in time. And I think as we went along, if you said in on any of it, there was also Dr. Luber yesterday. If you sit down on hers and talked about even infants being able to suffer illness, depression, and depressive symptoms, and how that affects their brain development, you see very quickly that there is a benefit to this. And I think Alicia talked about the goal of re-entry. And I'm not so far removed from private practice and representing parents that I know as parents, attorneys, and caseworkers, the focus is from parents, what do I need to do to get you out of my life? And the focus really needs to be, what do I need to do to keep you out of my life? And I think this parent-child therapy gives you that additional level of service that you're not going to get in the supervised visits, that you're not going to get in family support, that you're not going to get in parenting education, because those are more instructional, and this parent-child therapy really gets to the nitty-gritty of that traumatic damage to the child, the emotional damage to the child. And as we went along with these cases in family drug court, it's been interesting to watch because there's that initial reluctance on the parents to do the assessment, but we get them over that hurdle, and then they start the therapeutic process. And I think just listening, it appears that some of the early sessions are just kind of that building that therapeutic relationship. But in every case, there has been a point in time where we'll come into court, and it's clear that they've started to address that trauma issue, because without fail, the parents will come in, the reports are the parents said, if I understand that what I was engaging in was harmful and traumatic to myself, but don't tell me it was harmful to my child, because I love my child dearly and I never do anything that's harmful or traumatic to my child. And they come in and they want a new therapist. They say, I'm not doing this anymore. And, it's been nice being able to do it in family drug court because we're meeting every 2 weeks. And I think we may have some issues on our regular docket, to keep them engaged when they get to that point in time. But without fail, when it gets to that issue of what trauma you've caused to your child, we really get some reluctance. But without fail, once they start working on those issues, they come to realize, and I think Jennie probably will tell you about one mother in particular, because she's just so proud of our one staff member. The mom actually turned around and looked at her and told her what a benefit it was. And she immediately after the hearing asked the court reporter to grab the transcript so she could include that. So I think that's the key. You know, we for years have had kind of limited ability or limited capacity to offer services, and this is kind of, I think, that next wave of service that we can offer. And I understand it's in its infancy, and there's parts of the state that it's not available in right now. But if you have, as Jennie said, therapists in your communities who would have an interest in and can do the training, I think you'll see great benefits.
What point in the process are you doing these assessments, and how do you get parents and attorneys on board?
We do the assessment immediately when they come into family drug court, and we don't expect the assessment to look very good. And we try to point that out from the beginning. It is a strength-based assessment, so we're trying to point out to the parents that there are, things that they do very well, but that it's undeniable that there's a trauma that's happened even just from the child being removed. But in family drug court, that the use of substances or abuse of substances and oftentimes domestic violence and neglect has an impact. So we don't expect the assessments to show that there is a great relationship. We also try to provide hope in that that's what the therapy is for. That's what the child psychotherapy is for. And we've had a little trouble with defense counsel. Do you want to speak to that? And we can have the others talk to you a little bit. I will say one thing that is my carrot when I'm trying to say, this is what you need to do, is having lots of visits that are unproductive doesn't get you to monitored visits or doesn't get you to overnight. It just stresses the child. So one of the things that I always use as a selling point is if we put CPP in there and we start having productive visits where the children aren't distressed and you're having this good parenting time together, it's going to move your case along. So I'll let these two speak to the defense attorney issue.
I was going to say one thing also, just to answer your question also, it's post-adjudication that this is happening. I mean, it could be pre-adjudication, but, I would think as a defense attorney, you'd probably want to talk to the prosecutor, and you're not going to use any of this in your adjudication, right? And get some kind of agreement about that. But ours are always post-adjudication because they go to family drug court after they're adjudicated in our county. How to get defense counsel on board, and Karin may talk about this, but we actually had a presentation where Jennie brought in some videotapes about the therapy. It was a lunch and learn, and all of the contracted or frequent flyer defense attorneys in juvenile court needed to be there because the judges set it up, and if you want appointments, you come to these things, I mean, so you do have to use the judiciary's coercive control in order to be able to, to get folks to do it. Now, are there defense attorneys who really are not? Yeah, of course. They're going to say, look, it's faster to go this way, my client's going to get out of here quicker. But the ones that really understand that we got to repair the relationship are getting a little bit more on board. One thing I was thinking of as we were talking about this too, if you were thinking about, okay, how could we do this? You can get grant funds for a variety of things. So, one of the areas that we have lots and lots of filings on are cases of domestic violence. And CPP would be perfect in cases of domestic violence. I mean, how do you reunite a child with a batterer or with someone who has really had to work on his issues of coercive control? I mean, you've got to do something there. And this would be really a good fit for, that population.
Actually, it was originally designed to address domestic violence. And there's a great book by Alicia called Don't Hit My Mommy that is a manual for domestic violence and child parent psychotherapy. So,
Can I ask just real quick, you actually have a proper learned form or something that tells parents that they're not, that these interactions won't be used in later termination?
No, we're more informal than that. I mean, if I tell a defense attorney that I'm not going to use it, the actual assessment in the termination trial. Now, would I use whether the parent made progress or not? Yes, I would have to. But the assessment itself and saying you're a crappy parent, yes, then I would just say I'm not going to use that part. But of course, we would use if there's no progress.
And the videotapes we never show in court, and we have agreement in drug court that we won't do that. And the videotapes are for therapeutic purposes, for the parents to see, for the therapists to see. So we don't use the videotapes. Those are off limits, yeah.
And like, as speaking to the defense counsel, the two of our most successful cases in drug court since we started up again are, they were defense counsel that was not part of the drug court team. And I think that if you have defense counsel that have questions about it, I think that they can certainly speak to us, and to see just how beneficial it is to their client. You always have a client that's going to be resistant to anything, but I think part of our role as a defense counsel is to encourage them to really change their lives to be healthy parents. So, I just think that we had probably, it was one of the worst cases of, it was just a very bizarre case that was so much success because the child was standing on Heideman Road and not, and we weren't certain. She could have been killed by a car. She could have, there was just so much, and she couldn't find her mom. And they were in their pajamas, and her mom, I guess her mother was in the tree. It was just like, it was a very bizarre.
Well, it was, as we say, higher than a kite.
Right. And she's one of our most successful cases in drug court. And she's the one that really finally snapped. It just snapped on with her. So there's just a big benefit on this therapy.
I just want to speak a little bit to that case because that was one of the mothers that really initially said, I don't need this because I didn't traumatize my child. And we're all in drug court saying, your child was walking down Pine Lake Road in Lincoln and you were nowhere to be found. And she could not see the connection between those two things. And the issue with child-parent psychotherapy is the therapist is there to support the parent in looking at the trauma and addressing the guilt that they may have about what they have done, to their child in a supportive, therapeutic environment. And so when we insisted that she continue, she finally came to realize that her behavior did have an effect on her. And this is a mother who had a lot of anxiety also, and went even further to realize my anxiety impacts my child, and really made a turnaround. But there is a lot of initial resistance, which I don't think is unique to any therapeutic process. As all of you know, when you ask a client, whether it be a parent or a child or a teenager to go to therapy, nobody is skipping into the therapy room. There's usually some resistance to look at these difficult issues. They don't want to address that trauma. But had we not had the child-parent psychotherapy in that case, we would have had a mother who never addressed those issues, her own trauma issues, or the impact on the child. And I think that's where you see, the recidivism, because you're putting them back together, this dyad, where the mother has an extreme amount of guilt and doesn't realize, where the child's trauma has never been acknowledged, and those two things have not been repaired. So.
Is there an age limit or what ages are you doing there?
We're doing 5 and under. So we do child-parent psychotherapy and assessments with babies, with infants, and I did several assessments in my private practice, even on 12-month-old, 9-month-old assessments. They look a little bit different sometimes because obviously the developmental tasks are different, but they're looking at some basic issues that we sometimes make assumptions about parents knowing things about attachment. Interventions in child-parent psychotherapy are sometimes pretty simplistic but really impactful. And we have a lot of mothers who are holding their babies facing out, feeding them this way. And so an intervention may be as simple as, I wonder what would happen if you turned your baby and looked at her when you feed her. And then we have the mother do that. And then our role as the therapist is to say, look at her their eyes, or to videotape that interaction and show them later on the expression of the baby's face. And I think taking the time to videotape and look at those things has a huge impact, on that relationship, and even has on our court team. Like Alicia was saying, we were able to, as a court team, see this baby's reaction to the mom becoming distressed and upset, and that baby had significant trauma prior to that. So we use it up to age 5. It looks a little bit different. In older kids, we can do things like play narratives of the trauma, but that's very difficult too for a parent. In traditional play therapy, you might do a play narrative in a dollhouse or a sand tray or things, but the therapist becomes the one that is accepting of the trauma and helps the child, regulate through this trauma, not the parent. So then we put it back with the parent, and the parent hasn't been there to support the child. Child-parent psychotherapy, when we're doing a play narrative of trauma, the parent is the one that's able to step in and soothe the child, maybe with some cues from the therapist, and if they don't know how, maybe the therapist is modeling that or talking to them after the session saying, when your child gets upset like that because we're talking about, someone knocking down the door and, being taken away, what kinds of things can we do to help them regulate? But we're, helping them both be okay and deal with and cope with that narrative at the same time, rather than having them do that with a therapist and then the parent doesn't have any.
Are there models where this is used with older kids too? Beyond age 5?
Not child-parent psychotherapy. When I was in practice, I used trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, usually with older children, which does have a component sometimes where a parent, they read a narrative of the trauma to the parent, and it integrates the parent in there. And there's a lot of therapists that are trained in that also.
I was just curious how long it takes to work through the program if you do it like in phases. Because we do like juvenile drug court, and we have phases that you work through. We don't really put like a time frame, because obviously it takes as long as it needs to for the kids to get through it. But where we're looking at case progression standards and trying to make sure that we fit within the guidelines, you have like an estimated time frame that it takes to work through the program.
Family drug.
For family drug court, they would know about somebody else can talk about the levels of drug court. All the drug courts are different, but we can speak to Lancaster County's phases.
We have 4 phases, and getting out of the first phase is the
I
short.
think you're just asking about getting through the therapy, how long the therapy or the whole drug program.
It's the program for parents who work from beginning to end.
Okay, are you talking about child-parent psychotherapy?
Or drug.
Or drug
Or the family drug court program.
Parents group.
Up and down.
Well, we have 4 stages. In our drug court, we have 4 stages. And in the first stage, we try to make it the shortest stage, 45 days. And the second stage is, at that point is when we're working at getting the child back into the home, because by the third stage, the child has to be, fourth, okay. I should have time. Anyway, fourth stage is where then the child has to be with the parent in order for them to progress to fourth stage. But they have to be sober during that period of each stage, and for the amount of days. And I'm not sure how many days we have for the second. Is it 90 days? Like 90, and then on third is 90 also. And fourth is it has to be 90 also. It's just our first one is 45.
And I think it's about a year. I mean, the fastest you really can get through drug court is in about a year's time, which, when we have all these short time frames, that's one of the things that's really an issue, is if you've really got significant trauma, how can you get through that with your baby in 6 months? I was hearing a woman from Iowa saying that for their little babies, they have permanency hearings in 6 months, and I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, it's very difficult for a parent and a child to repair a relationship in such a short period of time. So, maybe maybe our numbers don't look so good in Lancaster County because we're trying to give parents lots of time to be able to, you know, to deal with some of these issues. I don't know. Our drug court, one thing about our drug court, we actually went to a family drug court training together, and I think we uniformly realized that our standards in our family drug court were a little compliance-based and not quite so behavioral change-based. And so that's one thing that we want to look at too, is that where are you in the relationship? Have you actually experienced change as opposed to you just marched through it a certain number of days and you were sober for a certain number of days? Because that's only part of the equation, as you know. So.
I'm with Justice, the computer system, and I just wanted to clarify something. If you put your case in drug court status, it doesn't count towards your progression. Okay, so, you know, that's kind of like floating out.
My question is, when you were starting this program and you were in your private practice, did you do the assessments and the therapy? And did that cause a conflict for the court and impropriety might look like you were in their pocket, so to speak? Making a recommendation for the therapy that only you provide?
Well, I wasn't the only provider. She asked about, since I was one of the only providers, if I did the assessment and then recommended child care and psychotherapy, did that seem to be a conflict? And I wasn't the only provider. I did a lot of child welfare cases before, so that was not uncommon, and I testified a lot. So it was not uncommon for me to be doing that. Really, to do the assessment is really a relationship building experience with the parent too. We do have some therapists that one therapist will do the assessment and then in Nicholas County they'll hand it off to another therapist. I really am of the belief that when you're going through the assessment, you do a parent interview that's fairly lengthy. I ask for everything. So the more information I had, visitation notes, I read police reports, I read everything that I could get my hands on to do these assessments to try and make them as comprehensive as I could. But giving a parent feedback too, which always should be done if you're doing an assessment, especially this kind of feedback where you're saying, you know, it doesn't appear to me that your baby has an attachment with you and we need to work on that. And, you know, me being able to say that's something that we can do. We can fix this and we can work through it, but you're going to have to trust me through the process. It would be difficult, I think, then to have another therapist do the child parent psychotherapy. And there is another model for infants and toddlers that is evidence-based, and it's parent-child interaction therapy. We picked child parent psychotherapy for the grant because it goes all the way down to birth. And what we really wanted to do was start these interventions as early as we can. And I think as Judge Heideman said, if you saw Dr. Luton's presentation, really up to age 2 is a really critical and sensitive period. And so we wanted to be catching these dyads before age 2 if we could. We also include foster parents at some point if it appears that a case is not going well or if the foster parent is having significant issues. With the grant, we have the flexibility to also bring them in and do child parent psychotherapy sessions with them, which has been extremely helpful.
Yeah, I've heard discussion about the therapy with mom, but is there with dad, and how does that go? Is there a different dynamic?
I've had 2 dads that I've ever done the therapy with. We do the therapy with parents. It just happens to be that we mostly have had other child dyads. It is a model that is very adaptable to, being gender specific or to cultural adaptations. I was just at the Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina at a 0 to 3 training, and we were talking about child parent psychotherapy. And because the model is fairly flexible, they were able to integrate certain customs into the child parent psychotherapy sessions. So it can be adapted culturally and for different genders, so. We just haven't had a lot of men. We haven't had any men in our family drug court. So we have them in Omaha, and we've done therapy with the dads. It would be separate dyads, though. That's the thing that we really focus on, one parent and one child at a time. At some point, sometimes we put multiple children in to do some therapy if there's multiple children, but we really want to work on building that relationship between the parent and the child, one at a time.
So you said, so this therapy can actually start at birth, so there hasn't been a trauma at this point. So, but I have a mom who had 4 children, and their rights were all relinquished in the face of termination, or they were terminated over a period of 10 years. It wasn't all at once, but one and another one, terminate, and then the last one. And so now she has a 5th child with him, with that, and they have that child in foster care for lots of reasons. So should they have something like that?
Well, and the trauma, maybe, yeah. She's asking about starting it at birth when someone's had multiple terminations, right, of other children. And we've had that. We've had several cases in family drug court, but and the trauma maybe in this parent has had several terminations, and they have a lot of guilt about not having these other children. And we're seeing that a lot in our family drug court mothers who are thinking, you know, they have been through this system before. They've had visits. They've not known what to do. They've lost their children, and now they've had another baby. They've probably got mental health and substance abuse issues that are comorbid. They've got all kinds of things going on, and then they have this new baby, and we just expect them to go on a supervised visit and know how to parent this baby. Well, it didn't work the 4 or 5 times before, so that's where the child parent psychotherapy can be helpful in helping them form an attachment with that baby. There's a really critical period between 6 and 9 months. Up to 6 months, babies prefer certain people, so they prefer their mother, they listen to their voice, those things are recognizable. But there is a really critical period between 6 to 9 months when attachment is activated. And so if we can get in there and get this mom to be nurturing and doing these things up until that point, and you know she's on track here, we can really make a difference in the kind of relationship she's building with this baby and address her trauma and her parenting. So.
Are you thinking that the grant that you have for Lancaster Sergeant Douglas, that perhaps that will enlarge, perhaps include other areas of the state, or is that how it was?
We would love that. You know, we'd love to get out into other areas. And one of the things we can do during the last breakout session, if one of your teams, if this is something you want to work on, if you flag me down, I can come around to your team. We are doing, I know that Dr. Hall is in Scottsbluff, and he does some of this work. And we're trying really to build a network of therapists so that they can do these things. We have a little chicken and egg problem, because if we don't have enough therapists, because people don't ask for it enough, and so we're really hoping to expand that, that role so that we can serve other infants and toddlers. So.
What if a team was interested in doing this today? Are the grant funds available?
I don't know if there's grant funds, but part of my job at the center is to provide kind of technical assistance about these things. So I've got a bunch of business cards up here, and we can try and get you started. Like I said, we're willing to add therapists in to our training groups, talk to your judges in your area, your attorneys. We're willing to do that to get this started. So, and funding get paid through Medicaid, which you can if you go through all the steps. The only difference would be my role in the family drug courts is I serve as a coordinator. So I go to all the hearings. I make sure that the therapist reports get to, you know, our staff and things like that. So that would be the difference.
Do you perceive that this could be something outside of the drug court setting you have in the drug court? Can this be done? It's just part of the decision process?
But I was going to say, I've got several cases on my docket where I asked, as the county attorney, asked for a child-parent psychotherapy assessment to be done, and then for that to be implemented, and the judges have done it. And because we have the ability to get it, then we are able to actually make that happen on a regular docket. I think the judge was wise in saying, you got to have somebody get them over that hump where they're really, the parent is really afraid of what they've done and they don't want to deal with it. But we've been able to do it, so.
This question kind of goes hand in hand with that. Does the family drug court, have you had any experience yet with an event where the parent is facing criminal charges? And then as a result, what happens? Is there a connectivity in relationship to the criminal charges and what's happening with the family drug court? And in particular, as it applies to the therapy.
Actually, when we just recently changed our rules about that. We had initially started with, if you have like a felony pending, something where you're likely to go to jail, you can't enter family drug court yet. After we went to this family drug court training, the judge leaned on me a little, as other people did, and we said, okay, well, let's just look at this on a case-by-case basis. I mean, because we know that there are cases that might pend for a while, but if the parent's doing well in family drug court, that a criminal judge is more likely to put them on probation because they see that, they're addressing the drug problems. So we just recently have allowed that to happen. We had one now? Yeah, we have one client who's got pending felony charges, and, I guess we're going to see how it plays out. That's all I can say.
And in response to the part about the therapeutic part of this, I mean, what we know about attachment is that we can teach a parent to be nurturing, and if we can have kids have healthy attachments, even if there's a separation, they're better off in the long run. So if they have a healthy attachment with a foster parent and they're able to do that, or if with that bio parent, then if there's a separation, they're able to then form a healthy attachment later on. What we don't want are infants and toddlers who have never been able to form that attachment, because it is much, much more difficult later on or outside that critical period for them to form attachment. Would it be a loss, if the parent's incarcerated? Absolutely. But they have the ability then to attach versus a child who's never had that opportunity. So I think we're out of time. So, but if you all want me to circulate to your team, or I have cards up here, you're welcome. We're more than willing to help try and get this started wherever. We're no stranger to walking in a room. I always told Vicki when I started talking about infant mental health, everybody gives me the polite head nod, like, okay, yeah. And I knew that they weren't buying it. So, but sometimes they have to see